Well, I'm Pastor David Allen, Senior Pastor of Christ Temple Apostolic Church, and it is my distinct pleasure and honor to have one of the city icons. He may not consider himself that, but he's one of the city icons here in the Houston area, doing a phenomenal job in ministry. Bishop James Dixon, we're so happy to have you here on today.
Pastor David, it's a blessing to be here, Pastor. I mean, the Allen family is generational in terms of kingdom service and impact, and so I'm humbled to be your guest on there. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, you know, we brought you in twofold. This is February Black History Month, but also just wanted to squeeze some other information out of you that may not have anything to do with Black history, but just the content of the ministry. So, in the bio, we discovered that you've been in ministry almost 40 years. How long have you been in ministry?
Well, I tell you, actually, in preaching ministry, 41 years.
Okay.
I think it is. I'm trying to stop counting. To be honest with you, my son, who's 13, says, "Daddy, how did it feel to play basketball with Moses?" You know, so
yeah.
But no, honestly, I'm grateful to God. I started preaching at age 15 and been pastoring the Community Faith Church now since 1981.
Wow.
So these years rolled by, but God has been so faithful.
Yes.
So faithful. Yes, sir.
The name of your church is Community Faith Church. Has it been that from the days of beginning, or did you change it?
No, we changed the name, but preserved the history, the legacy. The church was founded in 1873.
My goodness.
By the late Reverend Jack Yates.
My goodness.
Jack Yates was a church founder. You know, Jack Yates learned to read from a slave owner's son.
That's amazing.
And while in Gloucester County in Virginia before moving to Texas, and that's a whole history lesson about Black history itself.
Right.
But he moved here because his wife had been sold to a plantation here with his children. And after emancipation, he came and went back into slavery in order to reconnect with his wife and family. And after Juneteenth, of course, he could read because his slave owner's son taught him to read. He was called to preach. So he left the plantation as a preacher and determined to start the first school for blacks, which he did, founded the first school for blacks, and founded several churches, including the first Antioch downtown.
Wow.
I was, I think, the third or fourth church that he founded, but in 1873 with former slaves. And the name of the church then was Mount Pillow Baptist Church. And they became Greater Mount Pillow Baptist Church, as it was when I became the pastor. My grandfather, C.D. Dixon, my dad's father, pastored our church from 1927 to 1978 for 50 years.
My goodness.
And so my dad was baptized in the Buffalo Bayou.
My goodness.
As a kid when he was 7, 8 years old.
Wow.
And so I'm honored to pastor a church with that kind of rich history and legacy. We stand on the shoulders of a founder of Freedmanstown, a community developer, a businessman, an educator, a preacher, and pastor, and that's the DNA that still remains prominent and prevalent in the life of our ministry today.
I'm going to tell you, it's more than a notion, and it's such a. I'm wrestling for an adjective that's befitting, but it is such an incredible honor. But there's something else I'm searching for: uniqueness. It's not every ministry can say that they are a ministry of legacy. You're multi-generational in the tiers of your ministry, so you're literally standing on the shoulders of spiritual fathers. That's huge. So tell me, what prompted you to change the name of the church?
Well, we relocated in 1986.
Okay.
We were at 5309 Fagan Street in the West End.
Okay.
In a wood frame building, and our property was so small we didn't even have a driveway, not to mention a parking lot. And wood frame building where I grew up in church. God led me to move to Pinemont in 1986. We had less than $1,000 in the bank when we relocated, and left the building paid for and moved into a $1 million facility with no contract, no price, anything like that. Just a faith move, all faith. And after being there, the Lord showed me that our church needed a different image and a different reach. And that was a struggle for me. And we first changed to Northwest Community Baptist Church because God has shown me in a vision that our church was to be a microcosm of a community of what the community of kingdom looks like in manifestation. And the symbol of a community is a circle.
Yeah.
And in a circle, everyone is equal.
Right.
And so God gave me that vision. So we did Northwest Community, and I think it was in a sermon I just started preaching about we are a community of faith. Because everything for the kingdom starts with faith. Faith is kingdom currency. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. We walk by faith and not by sight.
Right.
Faith comes by hearing, hearing by the word of God.
Right.
You cannot transact anything without faith as it relates to God and the kingdom of Christ.
Yeah.
And that stuck. And by the time we built the building across the street, which we call the King's Dome, the house that Faith built, that community of faith had become the moniker, and so we fully embrace that, and it's amazing that that's really how the scripture describes the church.
Yes.
As the community of faith.
Yeah. Reading your bio, I can see that you're very community serving based. Has that always been your heart from the very beginning, or was that something that was developed along the way?
Well, I tell you, from the beginning, and I have to go back to my roots, to be honest with you. That's who I am as a person. I get emotional about that. My parents and grandparents always served, and I have to give them credit. My maternal grandparents was Titus and Victoria Barnes at Carl Barnes Funeral Home. Carl Barnes was my great-grandfather on my mother's side. Oh, my grandfather, Titus Barnes, cooked, barbecued a lot. I cook a lot now, but he never barbecued enough just for the family, always for the neighbors. And so while he was cooking and barbecuing before we would eat, he would say, take this down to Miss Jones, and take this down to Allen to Cousin Mag, take this across the street, right. Take this to Miss Flamer, and always giving. The same was true with my paternal grandfather and grandparents, C.D. Dixon and Velma Dixon. Take this across the street. And take this next door. Always about serving and making a difference, making an impact. And in my very early days as a pastor at age 18, we didn't have much at all, to be honest with you. And I remember sitting in my office saying, God, what do I do? I don't know what to do. Yeah. And I had two epiphanies. One, the Lord says, serve the community. So I just started buying groceries and taking them around the corner to the senior citizens. And then that expanded to 2 people with me, 3, 4, 5 people. We served 4th Ward, all around the West End. And then I started cooking with the members once a week to invite the senior citizens over for a hot meal. Gotcha. So that's in the DNA of who we've been. Yeah. But yes, when the Lord gave me the vision, actually God showed me our church building that we're in now, showed that to me while I was still on Fagan Street in a little wood frame building. I drew it on a piece of notebook paper sitting in an IHOP using a cup and a saucer to draw the circles. Is that right? Never knew where it was going to be and when and how. Right. But the Lord always showed me that the church should be extroverted, not introverted, salt of the earth, light of the world. And no church is relevant if its community context doesn't change because it's there. So our focus is on being Jesus to the community around us. Absolutely. Yes, and so that's been the motif for many years. Yeah. If I'm being transparent, and I don't mind doing that, we've had some role in outreach in the community, but not near enough. And so I think that our church is atypical to most churches in our country in that most people drive across town and they pass maybe hundreds of churches to get to you. To get to us. So our membership is not necessarily represented in the community, but it does not mean that we shouldn't have an impact on the community and the community not know who we are outside the brick and mortar presence in the community. So tell us about some of the things that you've been doing in your community. I will, but first, Pastor, let me say to you, it's commendable that people do pass those hundreds of churches to come back into the interior of Houston, Texas, to be here. That says a lot, first of all, for your level of ministry. And so you to be commended, and that shouldn't be looked at lightly by the people you have and by the people who will observe this program, because that says a lot. Certainly says a lot about the people who come back.
Amen.
Because, I think we have a real challenge in black community, to be honest, if I can be very particular, in that so many of us forgot where we've come from. And we've disconnected geographically, and it's difficult to make the journey back, not just to make the journey back in terms of geography and physical miles, but to make the journey back and to stay connected mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and financially. And it's as though, as you can well attest, many of our people who have been blessed to do better have moved away from as opposed to remaining connected to. And I think that is a fallacy of ours. No other community does that quite that way.
Yeah.
And the salvation of our inner city communities are ultimately going to require that those who have resources come back and reinvest our intellectual, our financial, and our influential capital for community transformation. It's why our schools die. You understand? So I know that's a difficult proposition, but it's necessary. It's good that you're here. We chose to stay on Pinemont when we could have bought other places and moved out. Pinemont is the southern border of Acres Homes, and the 4-4, as the mayor often reminds us. But why did we choose to do that? First of all, we were led by God to do it, but secondly, our determination was we were going to build a first class, we call it kingdom class, a kingdom class ministry operation that's multifaceted in Acres Homes, so that poor children will have access to excellence and greatness without having to leave the neighborhood to find it. Because if our families, if our children have to leave outside of their neighborhoods to find something of quality, then it decreases their respect for their own communities and themselves.
That's good.
And so we chose to do that. It's a challenge, and it comes, as you know, with burdens. But I think the outcomes far outweigh those burdens.
So you're just a great example of what a black church looks like, specifically in a black community. I'm going to ask you a question that specifically deals with development of inner city areas. Okay, there is those who frown upon the development of inner city because of gentrification. So how do you reconcile the development and gentrification?
Well, I tell you, everything for us starts with Scripture, of course.
Okay.
And so I want to talk about the biblical piece on that, then the historical. First of all, the biblical is, we do know that God chose the best land for his people. And that's a powerful thing.
Yeah.
And I think that often we didn't know we had the best land. And so we've left Acres Homes, 5th Ward, 3rd Ward. You understand? We left Studewood and Independent Heights because we thought that the better land was out in the suburbs, peripherals. Yes, but that was a deceptive tactic by those who really didn't want us to understand. That when you are 10 minutes from downtown, and from the Galleria, and from the airport, you understand. And our church, by the way, geographically, Tidwell and Shepherd is the center of Houston. We're just 2 minutes from our location. It is the very, if you put a needle on the center of Houston, that's where we're located. And so it's Canaan, right? And we're at the airport in 15, 18 minutes. When I drive, it could be 14. Galleria, it's 14 minutes. Downtown, it's 14 to 15 minutes. With next to 610, 290, and 45. Why would we leave that? And so development there is important because of geographic. But then also, when you understand that Dr. Edith Stanley Branch, today Dr. Branch used to say, if you have something that they're really after, keep it. Because that means it has value that you're not aware of. And so we were committed to doing that. And our vision is spiritual, educational, economical, residential, and recreational, all in one composite. And so when the Lord showed me that land, And he said, develop this, with a kingdom vision. And our vision is we're building a model community of faith extending God's kingdom, biblically, evangelistically, educationally, economically, socially, politically, and globally. But you got to have a model.
Yeah.
And so our determination was to put a kingdom model in the inner city. Right? And I think churches have to start with that. What's your ministry vision? What's the big assignment?
Right.
A model, a microcosmic expression of what the community of the kingdom would look like if you could go to heaven. You ought to be able to taste it, and so get a sample of it with that model. And so we decided that that's what we're going to. Our convictions are that's what we're supposed to be. And I've had members who said, maybe we ought to consider. Maybe we ought to consider. I've even had a thought, maybe we ought to consider.
Yeah.
But no, we're going to be a microcosmic expression of the kingdom of Christ in small portion right here in this community. And so we've done housing developments and things like that, economic development, educational development, and we got a park there and all that. But here's the piece. So others are coming in and gentrifying around us, but we still remain the largest property owner within 3 miles of us. That nobody else owns as much land as the church has. And so we've been able to influence what the community becomes. Okay. So now people are building around the church's vision. Pinemont was expanded, widened because of the church's vision. And that gives you power where power needs to be had, of course, with the school districts, with the city, with the county, with the state, because people respect that. But more than that, people are benefiting from it, don't even know who we are. People are living in houses, they don't know who built it, they don't know how it got done. All they know is it's increased their personal family's wealth.
Right. Because
they purchased a house that costs less than market value, that's now giving them a chance to build a financial footing and foundation by which they send their kids to college. That's what we really exist to do, salt of the earth, light of the world.
That's a beautiful thing. One of the things that I've been teaching here about wisdom specifically is the importance of mentors.
Yes.
Mentors, especially in this digital world, may or may not be in person.
Yeah.
Because we have now access to information.
Sure.
And the information is out there. We can follow. So there's really no excuse. But you had the unique privilege of having a series or several mentors of diversity. So tell us, in the early years, who were your mentors?
Well, it's very interesting, man. I've been so blessed. I've got mentors categorically, and I like to speak of them that way. And let me go back. So early on, when I started pastoring at age 18, Pastor C.D. Daniels at Greater Jerusalem around the corner took me under his wings and became a personal father in the ministry. I actually joined Greater Jerusalem as a pastor myself because I needed a pastor.
Right.
And he nurtured me in ways. And at that time, again, our church was a wood frame building. Our property was 5,000 square feet, and the building sat inside of that. Okay. So Greater Jerusalem was like, oh my God, you understand? and then one day I was sitting in my little study at my church and I prayed, Lord, I don't know what to do. And the Lord put on my spirit, call Pastor C.L. Jackson. I dialed his number, 713-228-5470. I remember to this day. I was 18 years old. I got the phone book, the yellow pages back then, called his number. His niece Janice, who's still over there, answered the phone. May I help you? My name is James Dixon. I need to speak to Pastor C.L. Jackson. He's busy. Well, I need to come and see him. He's not available today. I'm sorry, you have to call back another time. The Lord said, I didn't say call him, go see him. I got up out of my chair, drove to his church, sat outside of his office until he could see me. And he was rushing to go to an appointment. He said, young man, who are you? I told him who I was. He said, what can I do for you? I said, I need your guidance. I need your direction. And he spent 4 hours with me that day.
Wow.
4 hours with me that day. And you know what he taught me? Faith.
Wow.
He said, so you want to be a good pastor for Christ? I said, yes, sir. He said, do you have faith? And I said, yes, sir. He said, no, do you have real faith? He said, sit down. He talked to me for 4 hours about faith and belief in God. And we developed a bond. My first time on television, he called me one morning at 5:30. Dixon, what you doing? I said, I'm up, Pastor. I'm up. He says, I said, what can I do? He said, be at my church at 6:30. We're going to tape my broadcast. I want you to be on and co-host with me. And Shelton, the pastor and our son, was doing all the TV equipment. And I sat down next to Pastor C.L. Jackson for his broadcast. He made me the co-host 2 or 3 weeks in a row. That's how I learned mentors. So there's C.D. Daniels, C.L. Jackson, you see, and then it's been Dr. S.J. Gilbert Sr., who is still my mentor today. Most impactful spiritual leader in my life. In this community, Dr. S.J. Gilbert Sr. You know, but Mount Sinai that he pastored is where my grandfather got saved. So he's really my grandfather in the ministry. Making sense? And so those kind of mentors. Then you flip out of that vein to the development social impact vein, Reverend William Lawson. Yes, met him for the first time at a meeting I wasn't supposed to be in. I was too young to be there. He's at the table and in that room, and I remember how much people respected him. And he took me under his wings and taught me social impact, how to be responsible, how to show integrity, how to be humble. Most humble man you've ever meet,
my goodness,
and yet most influential. So those kind of individuals. Then you add to him Dr. F.N. Williams, you know, a social justice activist. Antioch Church around the corner from us, and then outside of Houston, I took our church to New York, and for a trip, we met with Dr. Floyd Flake in Jamaica, Queens, New York, the late Dr. Y.T. Walker, who was in Harlem, and then Dr. John Ray Youngblood. Mammoth works in terms of community redevelopment, economic development, and social impact with a justice motif. And so it expanded my vision, and I tell people, exposure expands expectations. If you say that around anywhere in my church, anybody knows exposure expands expectations.
I want you to pause just for a minute. I need you to pause just for a minute.
I'm sorry.
Look into that camera and explain what you just said. Exposure, what?
Expands expectations.
Now break it out.
Well, but let me say this. There would be no Timothy without a Paul, right? You got to see something. Exposure expands expectations. One piece I left out of this puzzle is that I never shall forget, Dr. C.L. Jackson introduced me to Dr. Ed Young, right? And, at Second Baptist. And he said, Dixon, go with me over to a meeting at Second Baptist. And I never said no. And this is what I want to get across to young people who are listening. You see, a mentor is somebody you submit to, not somebody you watch. And so many people want mentors that they don't have to submit to. They just want to steal from what they see. But anointing is transferred.
Come on now.
Through trust. So if you never submit, you can't be trusted. If you can't be trusted, the transfer will never make it. And that's why there's so many artificial people running around talking about they got something. But anyway, so he took me to meet to a meeting. Dr. Young was there. I'm at his church. And that's my first time seeing anything like that, right? So you know what I did? I used to drive to Second Baptist Church at night, 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, park my car on the parking lot, sit for hours, looking at football fields and baseball fields and 3-story buildings and all. I just sat there. And the first night, the security came to ask me, who are you? What are you doing? I told them who I was. They literally called in and ran it up the pole. And so Dr. Young, they gave them clearance. Anytime I'm there, don't bother me. I would sit for hours. And you know what my prayer was? Lord, are you the same God on Fagan Street where I am that you are on Woodway? Because if you're the same God that I preach about, that they preach about, then I'm going to believe you to do something big for me. That's exposure expands expectations. When I was a junior in high school, I was at Waltrip High School. I was a quarterback. Now, I was supposed to play professional football. Just understand. I was supposed to play football, right? But I started the Fellowship of Christian Athletes Club at Waltrip. I never shall forget Minister Rick Owsley, who was the youth pastor then at First Baptist on Katy, you know, the big church on Katy. Came to our school to meet with us about a big youth event they were having. I'm in high school. I went to that event. No other players went but me. And I never forget driving up to the event, I saw police officers directing traffic. I saw, this multi-story, $25, $30 million building. I never seen anything like that, but exposure expands expectations. I met John Bazzano, Dr. Bazzano, who was the pastor then, on the first night, on Tuesday night. And he said these words to me. He said, James, I know we just met, son, but I feel something in your spirit. Can you come back tomorrow night? I want to put you on program to speak. And I went back. I didn't go there Wednesday. I went there Thursday night, and because I couldn't miss my own choir rehearsal at my church, right? But I went there Thursday night, sitting on that stage. This place, thousands of people. I've never seen anything like that in my life. Exposure. And he put me up to speak. He said, I'm going to give you 10 minutes because we have a main speaker. I shared my message, my little testimonial message, and hundreds of kids gave their life to Christ that night. And that night, I prayed on that stage, Lord, if you ever make me a pastor, I want a church like this.
Wow.
I want to do ministry like this. Exposure expands expectations. And that's why I want to say to you, whoever we're talking to, whether it's in business or in education or in ministry, it's exposure. My parents exposed us to things. And I didn't know they could afford it then. I was just a kid.
Yes.
But I remember them taking us out to Fisherman's Wharf seafood restaurant on South Main.
Come on now.
You understand?
Yes, sir.
And they took us there. I didn't know then they couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
Exposure.
Yes.
Expands expectations. And so I just want to say that to you. And it's a principle that we teach every generation at the Community of Faith Church. And so even when we can't typically afford things, we make those things happen so that our kids will see greatness and excellence. For them, it becomes common and natural, and anything that's common and natural becomes an expectation that's achievable.
That's right. So you've got several things going on. You're active in the community. You're serving the community. You're developing the community. And because of the development, which is really the core of where you are, that's attracting other developers who may be involved in gentrification. You have a hub there that is central. It's the Lighthouse. Mm-hmm. Okay, you've got all that going on. Then, as I'm hearing some of your mentors, we have Dr. Lawson, who in my opinion, when you look at him as a social activist, he's not a Jesse Jackson. He's not a Al Sharpton. But yet that's who God linked you with, but you've had exposure to all of them. Yeah. How would you balance being a pastor to being a social activist where people don't view you as an opportunist?
Wow, that's a deep question. But let me say this, Reverend Jesse Jackson is Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Absolutely.
Right? Genius. I just did a piece Sunday, and I'm gonna finish it this coming week. I hate the fact that people really underestimate the brilliance of the black pulpit. And black preachering. Yes. It's brilliant. I'm talking about just absolutely astoundingly brilliant.
Yes, sir.
Brilliant. And but Reverend Jesse Jackson is just incredibly brilliant.
Yes, sir.
And then Reverend Al Sharp. These are brilliant guys.
Yes, sir.
They're not just talented, talking loud,
right,
charismatic. No, they got charisma.
Right.
But the content of their thought is just crazy, right?
Yeah.
And then Reverend Lawson is that as well, with this humility and a shepherd's heart.
Right.
And so I value having had Reverend Lawson in my life as a social justice activist and community impact leader, and he's a developer, all of that, but he's a pastor with a shepherd's heart. This is the man who will still drive to the hospital to go see the members. People don't know that side of him because you think he's this busy guy that's doing all these amazing things on this global level.
Yeah.
Can I tell you, Reverend Lawson's a guy that members had his phone number, and he'll tell you, I'm sorry I can't be at this big event. My member is in the hospital. I've got to go. Someone just had surgery, and I need to go see them. I tell you what, I'll get there, but I'll be late. Well, I've got to go have prayer with one of the good members of our church, Sister so-and-so. And, well, I'm sorry I can't make it. I've got to go to a funeral. Who died? Well, it's my member's cousin. That's Pastor Bill Lawson.
Wow.
And people don't know that.
Yeah.
And so that model helped me to know that you can remain a shepherd. And real shepherds smell like sheep. So anytime you get pastors that don't smell like the sheep, they're not a pastor, they're a manager. And I've never wanted to be a businessman in the pulpit. I wanted to be a pastor with some business. You see, and that's a big difference. And Reverend Lawson helped me to see the balance of that. I've had so many memories of meetings with him and people like Dr. Gilbert.
Yeah.
I mean, sitting in Reverend Lawson's house with his wife and some community leaders, you know, our meetings didn't start at 11 o'clock at night, and because he had church business.
Yeah.
So he would never have the meetings that we had at 6 or 7 because he'd be doing Wheeler Avenue ministry work. And then our meetings, we get that 10:30, start at 11 o'clock. Miss Lawson would have sandwiches and drinks, and we sit in his living room and eat sandwiches, and now we talk about community business. That's the model. That's the model. And so people don't know the cost of that, but and that's what he and his family has lived, I mean, for years. So I know Melanie and, you know, and
Sure.
Lawson and Cheryl and Roxanne
Sure.
from those kind of meetings.
Right.
And they have seen that. And my children now living the same.
So, Dr. Dixon, there's so many things that are in the air right now.
Wow.
I want to go back to the constituents in the black church who drive across town.
Yes, I have many of them.
So we have them as well. And what we're seeing though in the next generation is there's a passing of the baton from the old generation, that foundation. Some of it is being watered down in 2 generations from where we are.
Sure.
But keeping them connected, and I guess the question that I'm trying to ask is that how does the black church stay relevant to the new generation who may not be attracted to the traditional church robes and the crosses and the clergy collars?
Well, it's, you know, that is a challenge all of us are facing.
Yeah.
And so let me first say very, very, very transparently, I haven't figured it all out, like most of us haven't. We're all wrestling with this. And Pastor Allen, I've done a recent informal survey in our church and others around the country with other pastors, and I asked them, okay, look at your mainstay congregants, your members who make it happen, and then ask yourself, if they disappeared, are their young adult children in position to take over? Are their young adult grandchildren? If you've got teenagers, 12, 15, and young adults 20 to 30, do they look like they might even be remotely prepared to take over ministry and keep the kingdom going forward?
Excellent question.
That is a frightening reality.
It is.
When you think of it.
It is.
Right? And that points to the gap. And I think one of the things that has happened that we've got to really work on, and we're trying to do our best with it at the community of faith and beyond that, is our young people's ears are not tuned in to the pulpit. They've got voices in their hearing that are speaking loudly and often that contradict
Absolutely.
the message of the kingdom and the gospel. And that is a serious fallacy. And so we have a piece in our church called Generational Kingdom Family Legacy. That's a real ministry component in our church. And that means what it says, right? That I'm the product of a legacy, a kingdom family legacy. So we're spending more and more time getting our adults, parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents to make those stories relevant to their children and their great-grandchildren. Because most of them, Judges chapter 2, verse 10 says, after Joshua and his generation had died, there arose another generation who did not know the Lord, neither what he had done for Israel. And that generation forsook the Lord and served the Baals, and they provoked God to anger because they forsook the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtoreths, and God gave them over to their enemies who plundered them. And whenever they went out to battle, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them because they provoked them to anger. And they were in great despair. That's Judges chapter 2.
Yes.
And so that's a man. You could put that scripture layered over this generation, and it fits perfectly.
It fits perfectly because the prophets of Baal were money driven. It's chasing
Money and pleasure.
Money and pleasure, and chasing after the spirit of mammon.
Yes.
That is the new god of following generations, and we've got to be able to teach them that it's okay to make money, but don't forget your God.
It's okay to make money as long as money doesn't make you.
There you go.
And so what the enemy has done very cleverly, right? So we're dealing with humanism, pluralism, but we're also dealing with what I call iconism. So the world has made these iconoclastic images so large and so influential that whatever they do, younger generations buy into. Whatever they say, whatever their values are.
Right.
And so, when I was a kid, my heroes, first of all, my hero was my daddy at my house, James Wallace Edwin Dixon Sr., right? I wanted to be like my daddy. My daddy went to church. My daddy sang in the choir. He was a choir director.
Yeah.
My mother was an alto. She ended up president of the mission.
Yeah.
All of that. My daddy was a deacon. All right, so, and he's still my hero. So I had a hero in my family. My grandfather was a pastor on one hand. My other grandfather owned a funeral home. So I grew up with icons in my community who were my heroes. But outside of the house, when I looked at the media, right, the people I looked up to went to church. You see, Aretha Franklin was my mother's greatest singer, right? We'd listen to her all the time.
Yeah.
But Aretha was a church girl.
Yeah.
She's going to sing Amazing Grace.
Right.
Right. Even the larger entertainers, Lou Rawls was a preacher's kid.
Yeah.
So when you heard them talk, when you heard them, they're going to talk about Christ and God.
Right.
And they're going to go to church, or they're going to maintain some connection.
Right.
The heroes, the iconoclastic heroes of our children's age, generation, they are not that way. They are Buddhists, they are this or that, they are deists, they are whatever they may be.
Right.
And then they promote that which is anti-God, anti-Christ, anti-church.
Right.
And so the message is really destroying that model. And that's what we're dealing with in terms of this disconnect. Now here's the issue. What 2020 has proved to us last 4 years is that now they need the black church. They're realizing, now wait a minute, because the church is resourceful.
Yes.
And sometimes people don't know you're resourceful, you're relevant until you become resourceful. And they don't know that you are resourceful until what they've been trusting runs out and doesn't work.
My goodness.
And so for me, our church has to work harder on proving that we can be resourceful.
That's good.
So then we become relevant.
Right.
And then you do that by becoming relatable. And so those are the three things we focus on: being relevant, resourceful, and relatable. I drive that home to my church all the time. And now I'm doing the same thing at the NAACP. You got to be relevant, resourceful, and relatable, or else you don't matter.
So that's a perfect segue, because that's where I was going next. With everything that you've been doing in the last 38 years and just the privilege of having such great mentorship, now you're standing on large platforms and God has expanded your voice. And so your recent appointment is the president of the Houston chapter for the NAACP. So I just want to say congratulations to you on that. But what does that mean for you personally, and what would you like to leave as a landmark after you're done?
Well, first of all, I'm humbled to serve as the Houston branch president. I've been involved in NAACP now for 25 years probably. And when when Al Green was the president, the congressman, and then Brother Howard Jefferson became the president, and he mentored me for real. Oh God, and I got stories about things he's taught me long before that. So now, having served, I keep telling younger generations,
serve,
you have to serve, man.
Serve.
You have to serve. Please serve. But to serve, you got to submit. Right. And so I'm honored and humbled to have this position. The NAACP is the oldest civil rights organization in the nation, second only to the Black church. And so I'm honored to serve it. We have a great opportunity. We do a lot of work. Our major role is advocacy, and so we're really going to be active in terms of being advocates. We're working on social justice, criminal justice, economic justice, education justice, health justice as well. And so we've got those components that we're really working on in alignment with the national NAACP. So those are the areas that we are keying in on in general, but specifically on a local level. When you think about the economic disparities, for example, we did a disparity study at Harris County and discovered that African Americans are woefully underrepresented in terms of contractual procurement. In fact, Harris County had never done a study and did not want to do a study. Thanks to Commissioner Rodney Ellis, he had to pay for it out of his own budget, $600,000 just to get the study done to prove that blacks and minorities were being discriminated against there. The same at the Port of Houston. We've got the third largest port in the world, but African-American business procurement woefully disgraceful. So those kind of public agencies, we are evaluating those, and we're going to be challenging them to do right by business people, because if we don't solve the economic problems in our community, we won't solve the health or the education or the social. So that's important. Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 1000 companies that are based in Houston, Texas. We're taking a look at their board compositions. How many African Americans on your boards? How long have they been there? What difference is that making? What plans do you have for community reinvestment? We buy a lot. We are consumers. But that largesse that those corporations earn on our consumerism seldom come back to our community in terms of community reinvestment. So why are our schools crumbling when we make HEB rich, or Kroger rich, or Shell, or Exxon? We're the energy capital of the world, and we are contributing to their coffers through our consumerism, but it's time for us to get more than a banquet table once a year. We want real community reinvestment that builds our economic viability through support for our entrepreneurs, because if we can form real businesses that hire people in our communities, we can rebuild our own neighborhoods.
That's awesome. So, in my close, what would you say is a good partnership, and I think you've just described it, with the Black church and the work of the NAACP? It almost sounds like a rhetorical question, but should they be integrated or separate, or is it impossible to separate them?
Should be totally integrated. The NAACP owes its birthing to the Black church, and this is and the Black church has always been there. So here's where we've gone wrong. We put God out of the movement, right? We demoted God. When God was the head of the movement, we were making great strides. You put God out of the movement, you can't help but go backwards. And so when you look at W.E.B. Du Bois, the founders of the NAACP, these were church people.
Yes, sir.
Right? They loved Jesus.
Yes, sir.
And so the NAACP met at the church. Everything that we ever have done that's truly been progressive has come out of the Black church. And the Black church birthed our businesses, our social justice organizations, our schools, because that's where God meets us. And I do believe this. My children and I talk about this all the time. And by the way, my kids, Mariah, who's now 24, graduated in TSU in a couple of months, and Victoria, who's 17, about to be a senior, my son, James III, who's 13. You think I'm an activist? Look, they're on another level. they are more militant than I am. I mean, they are really, Yes, but we talk about this, that it was God and God through the church, and so the role of Black America, the Black Church in America, is really to save the soul of America, and no other voice can speak transformatively to white America and to America as a whole like the Black church can and the Black community can, because it is the voice of the oppressed, having forgiven the oppressor, that has redemptive power. Oh God. And so Jesus is the oppressed one, right? He's the suffering Savior crucified who becomes Redeemer. And that's why his words, Father, forgive them, are so powerful, for they know not what they do, because the very one who's being oppressed is the one who has the power to forgive the oppressor to the point of redemptive liberation. And so if we're going to liberate America from its history of racism and supremacy and bigotry, and teach America a new form of economic viability that does not require oppressive tactics, it has to come from those who've been oppressed to say, no, you can love your way to prosperity as opposed to steal, rob, kill, and maim your way to prosperity.
That's wonderful.
And that's the role that we're trying to play. And I think that's why we got to have the Black church got to come back home to the NAACP, and the NAACP has to come back home to the Black church. If we can marry those, we move the total agenda forward for all of us at the same time, and America would be the better for it.
Well, Dr. Dixon, thank you so much for this incredible time that you've spent with us. We're so honored that you took time out of your busy schedule, and even in this pandemic, you found time to come and to see about us over here in Cashmere Gardens.
Oh, I love it. You know, I used to live off a homestead.
Is that right?
Yeah, man, I was on to go to Key. Yeah. So this is home for me. I'm glad to be here. But thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
And may God continue to bless you in your amazing work that you're doing here.
Absolutely. Bishop Dixon, is there any closing words that you'd like to say?
Yeah. In addition to thanking you, thanking Michelle and Randy for this whole connection. I appreciate that. And your family.
Absolutely.
Your brother Steve and I were fishing buddies, you love to fish. But I want to thank the Community of Faith Church, because, as we talked about all the things that we do,
yes,
the truth of the matter is, if it were not the people at the Community of Faith who continue to reinvest and reinvest and reinvest, thank you so very much, because at the end of the day, there's no great leaders without great followers, and I appreciate y'all to the highest. God bless you. Thank you, Pastor.
Absolutely. I just want to say God bless you to everyone that's been listening. I'm going to tell you again that you need to sit up a chair, pull up a notepad, because there's so many rich nuggets that have been given here on this interview. We want to get him back, but I hope that you're inspired to understand our presence in the Black community, and to be stirred and inspired to get more involved and to make an impact. Again, I just want to say God bless you, and thank you to Bishop James